Have you ever started out the garden year and you were pretty sure that you were going to have a spectacular harvest? And as the season went along and you started harvesting your vegetables, you realized that you'd made some mistakes along the way and your production was less than spectacular? That's what happened to me this year. So I thought I'd go over some common mistakes that I made in my garden this year that impacted my production. So the first mistake is one that I think a lot of gardeners make, and that's putting seedlings out too early in the spring. We get so excited when we get that first flush of nice weather, and it's so tempting to put your seedlings out ahead of time and think that you're giving them a boost. And what's really happening is you're stunting their growth. I had that happen this year with my peppers. I had several varieties of peppers, jalapenos and bell peppers, that I put out too soon. We had a couple of warm days. I transplanted the seedlings and I thought they'd do great. And what they did was they just stalled. They never picked up production again, and my harvest was very minimal. I think on one plant I got 2 jalapenos off of it, and some of my bell peppers, I ended up pulling the plant because I got no peppers. So easy mistake to happen. I think it happens to every gardener. We just get so excited by that first warm weather and we jump the gun and get our seedlings out too soon. This jalapeno has been stunted since the beginning of the season. I put it out when we had a couple of warmer days in the spring, and then it promptly turned cold, and it's never produced as well as it should have. It's got one decent sized jalapeno on it down here, and you can see some smaller ones forming, but they don't really have time to ripen and become a full-sized jalapeno. So again, putting seedlings out too early never pays off in the long run. The next mistake is one that I make every year, and every year I say I'm not going to do it again, and that is not testing my soil. So I end up adding compost, adding things that I think the soil needs, without any confirmation that that's what it actually needs, that those are the nutrients it's missing. So next spring, I've vowed that I'm going to get my soil tested and amend my soil according to the results of that test, instead of just dumping compost in willy-nilly without really any plan or any reason other than I hear you're supposed to add compost. So get a soil test if you're considering it. I'd encourage you to do it. I think it had some direct impact on some of my lower production in some of my garden beds this year. Right along with no soil test would be inadequate or improper fertilization, and the same with compost. I use worm compost, and I also add fertilizer on a pretty regular schedule. The beds that I didn't do that in, I didn't add compost, I didn't fertilize regularly, suffered significantly lower production in, it was tomatoes that I did it in. And the tomatoes were subpar. They never really got any growth on them. They produced, but not as heavily as they normally would. And the fruits themselves were small. So I think, along with soil testing, I would say get on a regular fertilization schedule and, do as I say, not as I do. I didn't do it, and I suffered because of it. The next issue is one that I was particularly challenged by this year in the Pacific Northwest, and that was inconsistent watering. We had temperature extremes that were greater than we normally have. We also had rain at various times over the summer when normally those are our dry months. So I never really got my watering schedule down, and I wasn't that great about checking my plants' watering needs to see if they needed water. So all of my efforts, I was kind of chasing my own tail. I would check the soil, it was dry, I would water, and then I would forget that I hadn't watered regularly and wouldn't go out for a couple of days, and what do you know, the soil's overly dry. So inconsistent watering, I think, is a problem that a lot of gardeners have. It certainly showed up this year again in my tomatoes. I suffered more blossom end rot than I usually have, and I think that's a result of inadequate or inconsistent watering. Along with that goes mulching. I didn't mulch all of my beds, and the beds that I did use mulch in produced better than those I didn't. And I think that went hand in hand with the watering. If I had put mulch down in the bed, it tended to hold the water better, kept weed pressure down, and as a result, the plant wasn't really having to search for nutrients and water as much as those beds that weren't mulched. So mulching, I think, is something that I'm going to try and be better at next year and see if it improves my harvests. The next problem is one I think a lot of gardeners have, and that is not staying on top of pests and disease issues. It's really easy to walk through your garden and not notice what's actually happening to each individual plant. And this is an example of that. These were yellow squash. It is still producing, but it has a case of powdery mildew that's formed as a result of some rains that we got when we don't normally get rain in August. So I need to either treat the powdery mildew or just remove the plant. We're pretty close to the end of the season, so I'll probably just let these go ahead and grow to their full size and ripen and then pull the plant. This plant was attacked by squash bugs, got powdery mildew, so I had given up on it far earlier than it actually gave up. But I think that's pretty common with a lot of squash plants, things that are prone to squash bugs, pests, powdery mildew, those kinds of things. And here you can see an extreme example. This plant is done. It's not producing, didn't produce as fully as it should have. And that, again, I think that's because it had some early pest pressure and then got powdery mildew. So this one we're going to pull and we're going to call it season over. This last problem I have never really had an issue with until this year, and that was not picking fruit when it was ripe. By not picking fruit, you're signaling the plant that it's done growing. It's setting seed. Its purpose in life is complete. And so it stops producing vegetables. And this was particularly apparent with my cucumbers and some of my peppers. I didn't pick them as regularly as I should have, and as a result, they didn't produce as heavily as they usually do. So kind of lesson learned, when the fruit is ripe, pick it. That's true with cucumbers, beans, tomatoes, whatever. I saw it in my cucumbers, I saw it in my peppers, and I saw it in my green beans. Even though I got great harvests, they were less than what they could have been if I had been a little bit more consistent with harvesting. Right here you see an example of not picking fruit when it's ready. This was a cucumber and I didn't spot it. It was hidden under the leaves, and when I finally did see it, it had gotten way too big. As a result, this plant has stopped producing cucumbers a few weeks earlier than normal. So that's a few of the mistakes I made this year that impacted my production. Although I had a great garden, it was a good year for gardening, I still had some things that I plan to tweak and play with a little bit next year so that I get a better production. Main things for me were not testing my soil, trying to get an early start on things by putting seedlings out way too early, and then not paying enough attention to the soil needs and the plant needs, and watering and fertilizing consistently. Also keeping an eye out for pests and fungal diseases. Those were an issue this year when they've never really been an issue for me in the past. So I think it was just not paying enough daily attention to what my plant needed and not responding accordingly. I hope you had great production this year. If you've made any of these same mistakes, let me know down in the comments. And please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. It helps my channel grow and I appreciate your support. Take care, y'all.